they've still got routes, but they've made it so that it's easier for those routes to work. So it's become a much more accessible network, and that's all the trains that run across the whole of East Anglia. Not all, because there are some other operators, but the ones running out of Hertfordshire Street, run by Great Anglia, are all completely accessible. And I should say, by the way, that the same manufacturers make new trains for the Merseyrail network. Again, completely accessible, retractable ramps. And Merseyrail, they've done a lot more work on the stations, so they're now completely, a lot of them are completely accessible from train platform. And they've done this, and they're also making trains for the Tottenham and Metro as well. So it's possible to provide much more accessibility. And then, thinking about this as rather than just next year, this is something that's possible. And then you can think about area-wide ticketing for rail, bus, and other transport. Again, as I say, Cornwall's been doing that. And then there's the thing about thinking about stations as hubs or gateways for the surrounding communities with good active travel links, bus links. That's the bus link that serves Oakhampton Station. Will soon serve a sort of Oakhampton Parkway outside, which will provide better links between Oakhampton in Devon, this is, and the surrounding area that lost a lot of its rail services in the 1960s. Cycle parking stations, and so on. And this concept of stations as hubs and gateways is something I know that the rail network promote significantly, but it's clearly possible. I put all this up just to show really this good practice, and I know the underlines of some of this, but I think there's opportunities to think about this in the context of what you might do if you were thinking about the Abbey Line as part of a wider sustainable travel network. I didn't put this in, but there's clearly other options for the Abbey Line. And at various times we talk about rail line, and as already been alluded to, down the bus. Now, the light rail story is quite interesting. One of the things when this was serious, last time it was seriously looked at, a whole load of issues came up which were to do with cost and signalling, trams, and so on. And clearly, in principle, if it was possible to build light rail lines easily and cheaply, then the Abbey Line, as a light rail line with lines going into the centre of St Albans, beyond Hatfield, into the centre of Watford, you could imagine that being possible. Now, anybody who has watched some of the things that have happened with light rail in the UK have seen, for example, Edinburgh, which went massively over budget, starting to court cases, subject to massive public inquiries, huge politics, and so on. Now, actually, I mean, it is it's something that you might want to do something about, because it turns out there's a consultancy called Greg Streets that have been doing, who are quite influential on urban design, took a look at light rail and said, why is it that other countries can build new housing development around light rail lines and we can't? There needs some work, and it will be published soon. But one of the things they've discovered is that, firstly, that light rail lines in the UK have to be designed, all rails have to be designed to take 48-ton lorries. 48-ton lorries aren't even legal here, but they're all designed, they have to be designed to do that. And even if they were, most of the lines that the railways, streets around which light rail lines might go, won't have those articulated lorries down. But that's what the design thing. Also, 100% of the costs of moving utilities, from gas, water, electricity, telecoms, etc., fall to the light rail. And when I say 100%, that means 100% of what the utility providers say in the costs are, which is a license for the utility providers to create a very long shopping list and hand it over and say this is what it will cost. In France, by contrast, I think the proportion of 10%. and there's a negotiation done around this. So it's not the case that, and that also drives the cost. Other costs are the way in which they're regulated, the way in which they're promoted through transport networks. So you could imagine a situation if if we adopted even some of the practices in other countries, you could imagine the Abbey Line becoming a light rail line at the centre of our Hertfordshire network, and it would, you get the brick would pass in that because it would be much easier to do. Under current rules, it'd be mad to even try and think about turning the Abbey Line into a light rail line. But I'm just saying that, you know, that those rules aren't immutable. You can imagine that. By the way, one of the other things they've discovered is there's nobody that transport who deals with light rail at all. Just nobody. So that's another angle. And as for guided bus, I don't know if people try to live in municipal guided bus, but it doesn't have interavailable ticketing on it. Well, it does, but you have to pay a lot of money for a ticket that's valid on the two operators. And that's not by this, and that's not the fault of the operators, it's the way in which competition rules work. Because if they were to agree to it, they'd be deemed to be anti-competitive. So that's the way, the mad way in which competition rules apply here. I'm going to mention the Hertfordshire Enhanced Bus Partnership, which is great, but it doesn't get over that problem. In a world in which, as the Labour Party have promised, you move to universal bus franchising, that might change. But quite clearly, if you were to turn the Abbey Line into a guided bus, you would get a worse service, and there'd be no guarantee the other thing about it. If the Abbey Line, for some reason, were to be up for closure, it would have to be a big closure. They'd have to actually find a closure. If the Abbey Line as a guided bus, the bus operator decided that it or wasn't making that money, they could pull all the services off tomorrow. Well, they had 56 days notice. So it's not quite here. And by the way, there's enormous court cases going on between Cambridgeshire and the infrastructure provider that developed the guided bus there, because actually which turned the railway lines into a guided bus because it was done really badly. It's not a cheap option in the way that people think it is. So anyway, I'm saying there are opportunities for making much more use of the Abbey Line in a world in which you actually believe that we're going to have more sustainable travel. But I thought I'd better say that. And as I've said, there are opportunities for public transport because we could do much better marketing than what we have, because we have good public transport, we don't know about it. There was also opportunities for demand responsive transport, which was already operating around the place. In North Hertfordshire and Dacorum, there's something called Herts Links, which, though there was one in work, very good click. So I'm thinking of these as feeder services for something like the Abbey Line rail. But you could, because that's what's happening in North Herts. There's a demand responsive bus which picks up people from an area that's had very few bus services for many years and takes them to places like Stevenage and Royston and Bishop Stortford. And something like 25% of the users of that are people who previously drove for rail to those stations. So there's clearly something going on there. But another 25%, by the way, are 16 to 18-year-olds who go to college in Buntingford, and previously they were all driven by their parents. They hated it because they had to rely on their parents. Their parents hated it because they had to drive their kids places. So this is a case and where everybody wins. And actually there's some potentially big carbon savings there. So Herts Links, which is now being extended to Dacorum, is a really interesting model. There's also employer transport, and I mentioned Zelo, which is another sort of demand responsive transport. They run services for Ocado and Happy Business Park. You could imagine some of the business parks around the Abbey Line running feeder services in that way, particularly if it's made tax efficient to do so. And I've said things like bus priority, better walking and cycling to stations. And there are some examples from elsewhere, like Sevenoaks, where the town council actually promoted its own town buses, Hereford, which has had free buses at weekends. And I mentioned Cornwall. Yes, Hertfordshire has an enhanced bus partnership, which is building on the Interlink model, which is doing quite a lot in terms of making things work. But it's not linked to the railway, and as far as I can make out, that they are trying to make some improvements. So there is an opportunity there to think about that. As I've said in the Labour manifesto, there's a commitment to making it much easier to franchise buses on the London model, and that would be quite interesting if that were to be something that would happen here, because you could then mandate much greater connections between bus and rail. I mentioned Cornwall a bit. So what they've done is to create Transport for Cornwall, one public transport system for Cornwall, an integrated transport system, single brand, integration of timetables to facilitate seamless transfers, unified information platforms, integration of payment systems, integration of fare systems, and they've actually cut the fares. This is before the £2 bus fare, by the way. So you've got a situation, I think it's £5 maximum fare across the daily fare across the whole county. The really interesting thing is that they're now trying to integrate this into rail, so with Great Western Railway. So the idea is they'll be able to have the zonal fares into and out of Cornwall, and that map at the bottom there, Launceston, that's a £2.50 town service they've got. The key point about this is, I know I've focused a bit on buses. That's one of their Transport for Cornwall buses that they've contracted with the Go-Ahead Group. And they've got rather good displays at sort of railway stations and so on, real-time information. Key point about this is they have a long-term plan, and that they've been able to grab money whenever they've been able to see it. And so the Mid-Cornwall Metro I mentioned is funded by, it's not transport funding, it's funded by Levelling Up funding, which they put in on got. They had, when it's available, European funding. They got HS2 to finance a new rail depot, which then Penzance, ostensibly to save the sleeper service, but really actually because it upgraded, it provided a high quality maintenance depot for upgraded services. They've got more tap on ticketing, as Hertfordshire has, certainly than it's on lots of the London principles, daily cabs, all of that. So, and the point I've been making, as I say, they don't have more powers than Hertfordshire. So you could imagine this happening. You could imagine it being something that would work for the Abbey Line. I mentioned journeys to work. I think in a sustainable transport world, you'd want to work with employers. I've mentioned you can work out the carbon community levels. This is something that a group called Mobility Ways, which came out of the lift share, which most car sharing did, which is an average commuter emission level dashboard, which can tell you for an individual employer or for an area what the levels are and how they match with other areas. And you can do things that involve moving to net zero commuting with bespoke bus services, existing buses, rewards for sustainable travel, and so on. And you can, and some of this is going on in Hertfordshire. Maylands Business Park has links to railway stations, part of their travel plan, Stevenage too. So you could see how that would work. And you can also see car clubs making a difference, because there are ones in what Gordon's, and increasingly Enterprise and the others are putting them next to railway stations. So if you want to go in Scottish Borders, for instance, you can get a train to Berwick-upon-Tweed, and there's a car club car on the platform. So you could imagine integrating car clubs into the Abbey Line and into public transport networks. And for short distance trips, because a lot of car journeys in Hertfordshire are very short, something like 35% of car driver trips, 41% of car passenger trips under 3 miles, and you could see about ways of linking those. And I mentioned cycle parking at railway stations, and there's a lot of stuff about journeys to school. In general, this is more broader. It's not just another story. It's a broader story about sustainable travel. And there is a need to give priority to pedestrians and cyclists along the main roads, which is under the School Streets initiatives, which you can see School Street top right there. Those are things you could imagine making a difference to. And bike hire, because Watford and Boreham would already have bike hire schemes. The Watford scheme, I think, is 300 bikes, 72 bays, and there's more and more e-bikes coming in. And they can be a game changer because they can make cycling easier, more attractive for many more people. And there are local e-bike stockists as well. And e-cargo bikes can be used for deliveries, even in quite small hilly places. There's a cargo dale delivery service operating in the Pennines around Hedgen Bridge places, which tell so if you can have that there, you certainly have it here. And there are e-bike delivery services in a number of cities, and they're starting to move out as well. So, as I say, Watford already has bike hire schemes. I think there are bays at the Watford Junction.
We are looking at bays being installed at other stations in the Abbey Line.
So I think that would be
being started.
Yeah. So I think that could be possible as well. And Beryl, this is sort of creeping out through Hertfordshire because I said Watford and Boreham would now have a bike hire scheme. Stevenage is about to get one. I think East Herts is about to get one.
Three Rivers is about to get one.
Three Rivers, is it? Oh, they refuse to be part of the Watford scheme. So, but this does make a big difference in terms of the opportunities for sustainable travel. I mentioned linking land use and transport. I've been part of a project called Transport for New Homes, which has been looking at what's actually being built out there, and actually a lot of it's rather car-based with very little green space, and without, in some cases, pavements. That's somebody trying to walk to the shops in Wiltshire from a new housing development. It's possible, and there are lots of lovely master plans, and the reality is new roads and car parking. So there are some real and public transport opportunities are being missed. And even sometimes when you do get from the station, sometimes to certainly housing development, sometimes the housing development or phase one of the housing development is miles away. It's only phase 6 that's going to be next to the station. So there's a real issue here. And I notice I've put this up because Labour particularly making a big thing about building new housing and about building new housing that is higher density and linked to public transport. So there's an opportunity there, given how much housing development is proposed and everything, to think about how you might link up new housing development. Obviously, the other big development here is, of course, the railroad tunnel, which I want to talk about. But that's another story. But but in housing terms, there are some alternatives, and here's some places where there is better practice does exist. So Kidbrooke in South East London, which has a good bus links to the railway station. Cranbury, which we talked about, Kings, Prince Wales, big development in Dorset, where 32% of residents walk to work. Shawfair, which was built around a station on Borders Rail, but much criticised by the opposition because people said, well, nobody's using it. Well, of course nobody uses it because it was there to attract new development for commuting and development. And Derwent top story, and I mentioned the place in Leicester, which goes by the delightful name of New Lowestoft, which have buses from day one. So there are opportunities to integrate planning and transport in a way that we haven't been traditionally very good at here, but is critical to sustainable travel. And implications for new housing in Hertfordshire, well, you'd have to have much high quality public transport at the centre of development rather than an afterthought. And the design of development and surrounding roads should prioritise walking and cycling, and local services and facilities that people can walk and cycle to. There's also an issue about managing traffic and road space, because if you're going to have alternatives to single occupancy car use, they have to be given priority on the roads, pedestrian priority with linked up walking networks with signage, traffic lights, better crossings and so on, proper network of cycle routes, cycle parking, parking, on-street parking, if you're going to have pedestrians, cyclists, buses and e-scooters, although there is an issue of disabled drivers, and might be linked to car clubs. And I know there's been a whole lot of stuff about low traffic neighbourhoods, but it is the case that the Waltham Forest, Mini Holland in London, has seen 32 minutes extra walking, 9 minutes extra cycling a week compared with other boroughs, and 51,000 households no longer suffer from illegal air pollution. But I should say those figures are contested by people who don't like low traffic neighbourhoods. But anyway, there is that diagram at the top right is healthy streets as an option. I'll put this up really just to talk about powers and funding, because Nottingham has introduced a workplace parking levy, which is paid by employers with 10 or more spaces, £300, no, it's more than that now, £50 per space per year, and it's raised around £9 million a year for transport, including extensions to the trams, upgrades to rail station, more buses and so on, and more trips in Nottingham made by public transport outside London, anywhere outside London. But I think it's a broader point, because there's been a lot of talk about devolution here. And I think one of the stories about the Abbey Line local rail lines is about local management and local say over rail services. And I mean, we don't have to go very far away to see what happened with the Euston North Junction line that transferred to TfL as part of London Overground, when it became something that actually somebody cared about, and put on some trains and stations looked after, and that's been the case elsewhere. And actually, you don't have to go very far. If you go to the other end of the London North Western network in West Midlands, there's a West Midlands rail executive, which is all the local authorities served by the West Midlands bit of that franchise, which it does mandate that somebody actually clears the rubbish underneath the centre of the station, and does things about and actually manages what happens to the rail services then. And that doesn't mean they're brilliant. They are they've been responsible for making things happen there. And by contrast, there isn't a plan for doing that. The Abbey Line, all for that matter, the actual line which has had no services at all for ages, because of various things to do with rolling stock. And there isn't a framework in which Hertfordshire, in this case, the various authorities in central Bedfordshire can have a framework talking about this. So I think there's something mentioned in the Labour manifesto about giving local authorities more say over the local rail lines, part of the wider British Railway. But I think there's a broader point about evolving more transport powers and funding. And actually, when Keir Starmer was challenged about the traffic agency, he said that should be a decision for local authorities. So I think there's a clear intention to do that. And so there's an issue about how that happens and how Hertfordshire as a transport authority can work with the other local authorities, with TfL and others, on not just the Abbey Line, but on rail lines in and around Hertfordshire. So I'll finish in a minute. So I think there's a devolution story on there, and so this is my will anything change? If you did any of this, will transport policy and behaviour move? There's all sorts of hassles there. Bus falling into a hole, a bus shelter with no buses at it, and so on, and people having to walk in the road because there's a car park on the pavement, and so on. And we do have some evidence that if you do some of this stuff, because the coalition government produced the local Sustainable Transport Fund, which did fund a lot of local initiatives, including some rail service initiatives, and the evidence was that more people that it reduce carbon emissions and increase use of sustainable transport. And there are opportunities for bringing things together, mobility hubs in various areas, delivery hubs with cargo bikes, first last mile, integrating public transport services with social services, etc., and joint ticketing information.
It's the picture, Stephen. It looks like a demonstration against the bus.
No, that's people in Scotland. So travel behaviour can change. Oh, sorry, the slides here about car use falling in those drive areas, and we can see that there are that if you do change things, travel behaviour can change. And so moving away from car dependence, places like St Albans, Hertfordshire could move towards less car-based development, better public transport, etc. And it can be cheaper and greener. And you can have smart growth rather than dumb growth. That's what happens in China if you resist a road scheme. But the key point that slide makes is that travel can change and that you can have economic growth without lots of roads and cars. Thank you very much.